Yeah.
I lost my Zoom window.
The problem that I have with Zoom is that there's always like a little bit of lag when I hit the video button. And then I like turn it on, I turn it off, I turn it on, I turn it off, because I sort of spaz out instead of just, you know, doing what I need to do. I just realized my sweater isn't up here, but oh well. But yeah, it's like I'm so used to using Meet that when we do switch to Zoom, it's like I forget how to work things.
Yep. I know what you mean.
Hello.
Hi.
So I guess I'm driving this.
Since you volunteered.
It's fine. So I think today we have Patrick. Is Patrick here? Yes, Patrick's there. Cool. And he is going to talk about the query. Oh, he's going to give a query builder demo, which will be part of also next week's community call. And he would like general thoughts. All right, general thoughts coming. Yep, take it away, Patrick.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, so I'm just going to sort of show different parts here, and you'll have to give your thoughts then. So the basic idea is that we're basically having connected inputs instead of the way it works today. So if I would take, for instance, I will use InfluxDB here as an example, and I would have add a where here. So then I would pick CPU, and then I would get this thing here where I can then change these if I want to. And I can then also then pick the value I want. And this can also then easily be removed by simply clicking there. So I'll do this again. And then I can add another one. And then here I can pick a value here. And here then I can pick if I want and or. So that would be this section here. And this here would work in a similar way. So I can maybe pick a selector here for this. And they can also just be removed. So I'll do this again. And then I can pick like a transformation. And here I have this sort of, so the difference here is that with the last one here, I can't change this thing here. I think in the dark theme it's sort of subtle when it's disabled background or interactive background, but as you can see here, you get some sort of hover effect that should tell you can do something here and here as well. And these can also be removed the same way. And if I want to add another field, I would go here. And yeah, and then you can also see on the fields here that these cannot be interacted with, but these areas can. So, and then when I added a field, you get these trash cans here because then you can remove one of them. But in this case, you always sort of need at least one field here because you need some sort of data. And that's it. Short presentation.
Are you, sorry, are you able to, I guess this is very specific to InfluxDB. Are you able to just briefly re-explain kind of the different, in the select clause, the difference between the two pluses?
Yeah.
Like the two add actions?
Yeah. So this sort of adds manipulations, or you might call it, operations to the field. So here I would add this sort of thing here. So it acts on the field, and then if I add another field, so this is basically adding stuff to this row.
Yep. Yep.
And basically, but if you have this button here, it basically adds a new row. So
it's a new, yeah.
Influx, yeah, so it's a new thing. So this is sort of specific for InfluxDB, but I mean, in certain situations, you would simply just maybe add new rows instead of adding chains of these things.
One thing, and sorry, I will pop this into the docs. I wonder if there's an accommodation in this type of layout to either just state without being able to change it, like the I don't know what you call it, the operation between those two, like those two fields that you've added. Is that like is that and, or is that or like, do you know what
Yeah, so yeah, I understand what you mean. I hope this sort of should be sort of self-explained within the data source, but it's a really good question because there are other situations where we actually have these situations where you can sort of pick and or between, because there's one data source in enterprise where you can sort of have a group that you sort of put in parentheses. So you have like two groups that you can and or, and yeah, I haven't really figured that. So that's sort of the next step, because that is sort of a more complex thing, I would say. I can sort of share a bit from, also I'm working on a presentation for this. So
just first off though, this looks like an amazing improvement on, I guess, what we have at the moment on presenting things a lot more logically and intuitively. I think this is awesome.
Yeah, so that basically here you have some variation on how it could work. You can also have, in some situation, you might have multiple values. So then you can have like the multi-select thing also going on. And the idea is it should be quite clear, like what you can interact with and what you can't interact with, which I think is sort of the important part. And I also, let's see. So I have been sort of exploring loads of different data sources, what this can sort of could look like. So here you would have like CloudWatch, for instance. You get everything just in a row here, and then you have the dimensions basically works as the where function in Influx. So any other thoughts?
I think this looks really good in general. One comment would be if you go back to the InfluxDB one, I think there's pros and cons here. I don't know where I mean, because one thing that has changed here is that, yeah, all these options, time zone, order by, limit, S limit, I think those three are kind of options that are not visible currently. They are kind of so options that you can optionally add by hitting the plus, I think. And so my fear is, like, one thing that I think is good with that is that we don't overwhelm users with optional options. And here all the optional options are visible, which is good for discoverability and for kind of, yeah, for the user to know that these options exist. But it, that's the pros and cons there, that I don't know what the optimal kind of solution is for like showing all options.
When I change it from Angular to React, now all of them are shown always. So like, I agree with you. I'm just saying that it is now visible always right now.
Okay, because this is something I would like to sort of, I think the Prometheus,
I mean,
sort of similar.
we can hide it again.
So many options that are optional that kind of clutter the query that are just used in rare cases, but it takes, so if you have multiple queries, it's very hard to see kind of what's the important part when you have all these optional options that you haven't used. And I see this becoming worse over time as we add more and more options to these query builders, is that, yeah, they're going to be like, each query is going to be a page of options that are empty. That's the thing that I
but that would be like a second thing. But could you have like a control for that? Because we talked before about the header, because it's sort of off limits now, it feels like, because it's, I don't know, you can't really add stuff to the header at the moment, but it would be nice to sort of have then an advanced option there to just you click it and then you get all the optional things. Yeah.
I've got a comment for the optional options. If we can hide them, I think that would be good, mostly because I don't think we need to do extra work to make things discoverable, because someone who's using Influx, they will already know some of the Influx features, and then they're happy to look for them. And I would sort of argue the rarer case is that someone who's never used Influx before comes to Influx, somehow data ended up in there, and then he's trying to figure out, oh, what's the best way? What sort of options do I have? I think that's probably the rarer case, but I could be wrong. That's just my opinion.
I think I agree with you for Grafana currently. When I hear about Grafana wanting to be more adapted to like BI use cases, that's when I start to think about, oh, okay, maybe these people making these queries, you really only like make a query like, yeah, maybe I'm just wrong, but I think when we start talking about those BI things, we start getting, oh, maybe that's less so.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. That's going to be a different project where we actually want to do sort of the lowest common denominator and make.
Oh yeah.
I've got another comment, which is from the design side, if we can make the non-mutable fields more explicit, because that was a bit. I mean, you mentioned it already, that's not so easily seeable in the black theme, in the dark theme, but I wonder if we could like improve this somehow. So that's one part. And the other one is the selection process here, where you have to say field, where it's kind of clear. Isn't this rather implicit in the role that you're adding a field value here? And because you can't really change it anyway, right? So to me, this looks slightly weird. So I would rather say, like in this particular Influx instance, maybe it would be, maybe the section header there would be select field. And then that's it, right? As opposed to in each row saying field equals.
I'll see if I understand it, because I had this other way of So my initial exploration of this, I actually had field as the label, but then I had didn't know what to call these extra things. But the thing that worried me there was that it sort of is a bit different from the current, how it's used currently, and if the select part, because then that sort of vanishes a bit.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I guess since we're kind of staying around influx, it would have been interesting to see if the way we do things currently is already a compromise, and maybe how influx describes it is already different. If hopefully that's the case, then I much prefer this now here, where you can add a field and then some modifiers, for lack of a better word here, right? That can change the field values.
Definitely. And I also sort of tried it. Let's see if I have it here somewhere. Yeah, so this would be if you use Flux. I just sort of explored what that would look like, because that is sort of a totally different thing where you had these filters instead. So basically I just have a bucket and then the filters. But then I wasn't sure. So this quite a lot looks like the way they do it in chronograph. But yeah. So this is
it looks
like
interesting.
I
like it actually. So, and also I would say the same as David that on the previous Flux one, I think one of the reasons was that, okay, I wasn't there when it was created, but it feels like the original idea was that if you read everything from left to right, then it kind of sounds like the SQL query. That's why there is like the from and the where and the select and so on. But I think it's okay to leave that terminology there, and we just say that. I mean, I could even go with the from rename to database or bucket or what's the word there, and where will be the filter or whatever, or filter by tag or something. I think we can leave that SQL-ish terminology for the raw query, but I mean, that's just my personal opinion.
But the sort of the component in of itself, are there any like issues there you can see like that I haven't really contemplated on doing this that I sort of missed? Is it something that stand out in that sort of way?
Yeah, like an immediate question for me is how are like drop-down lists covered here that have 10,000 entries? Like how can I search in there?
Yeah, so I mean, they will work in a similar way that things work today, that you can type on, like just type in a drop-down. Basically the same way you do today.
Okay, that's cool.
If I may, a question, like I missed the first couple of minutes, so this might have been we gone through this one. Like for example, influx, you can do these where sections with and then or, but like obviously you can't do some of those Booleanish operations, like where you group some stuff together. Like, is this planned to be worked on, or we go with this approach here? I don't know if it's understandable.
So you mean if you would have, I think you understand that you would have.
Yeah, like imagine parentheses somewhere in the query.
So you would have, that is something that would be super nice, but I'm not really sure.
I think I think the ADX data source, if I'm not mistaken, does this trick where it's somehow like, I think, okay, everything that is one line is ended together. When if you or, that's a new row, and you are oring together the rows of ends, or vice versa. I don't know which one I forget, but maybe makes sense to look at that one. I feel like in that approach you can do all those stuff. Whether we need it or not, it's again maybe a question. I mean, we can always tell the user that if something is not possible, that please use the raw query editor for those advanced use cases. So I'm not saying it must be supported, but that's something that like an IT person, like, like why can't I express those relations there?
Yeah, but I would say maybe, so if I understand it, it would be like, if the where here would be CPU equals CPU1 and CPU2, or equals CPU3 and CPU4.
Yeah.
Or it could,
I mean, I'm not saying it's a real use case. I'm just saying that right now it's unclear to me even right now. If you create like 4 of these where blocks and you do and, let's say, I don't even know how they are composed. Like, we are leaving it to the influx database, but
that is very true. Good point.
One question.
Yes.
I know when I think it was Jess who did some work for the ADX query editor. I think she had an idea, or we talked about an idea that, and I think this connects to the trying to build a query editor for non-tech people, or maybe people that don't really know super much about the data source that they are querying. But then we had an idea about structuring the query builder depending on what kind of query you're trying to build. So basically, if you're trying to build a time series query, you would get help of defining, like you need to have a time field, for example, and at least one value field. And you get guided in like building a query that will result in that kind of data. And on the other side, if you just want to query like table data, then you don't have any of those like criteria. Have you thought anything about those things, or?
Yeah, so basically my biggest focus has been sort of the segment component that is used today, that is used like all over the place and in different ways, and usually sort of being used in a sort of unintuitive way. I mean, when it was created, it was basically for graphite, where you just added segments like in a chain, and in that case it sort of really makes sense. But now it's used in a way that you can like click on 2 different places inside the segment, and that different things happens and so forth, and you get open drop downs and whatnot. So that has sort of been my main focus here, to sort of replace that component with one that is more clear for the user how to use that specific small part.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
The other thing to add there is that the BI team does have sort of like notions towards how, I will call it notions because it's not really a plan or a design at this point, but an idea of, what might we do to make querying easier for people who are not comfortable querying. But it's very early conversations right now, but I think that, as Patrick mentioned, that it's a little outside of what he's doing here, but it's definitely something that is being talked about quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, then it's like in the future we have to really look at the structure of the query builders of themselves, sort of how things are ordered and so forth, and right. Most of them also behave very differently.
Right.
Anything else?
One question is kind of the function component. As InfluxDB is used, some of these kind of fields can be wrapped in multiple functions that have multiple parameters. So that would be like hold winters, for example, or some other kind of functions that you can then add as a function chain after the field.
Yeah, so that would be this part here where you simply add, where should I go back?
Yeah, but
you would add more functions.
Yeah.
But you mean that the function would be
a single unit with like multiple parameters, and a name and multiple kind of arguments.
Okay, yeah, I got it. So like
is it like a function call?
So you would have like multiple.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it
here
would
you
be,
just have one option.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say in that case you could basically have more inputs then.
Yeah, I think so. It would be almost good if there was some title above them as well to signify what the parameter name is.
All right. Okay.
Or some way to sort of
kind of like how all those time zone ordered by element, etc., etc.
Yeah. And preferably, I mean, not an equal signs, but almost parentheses or something that kind of makes it clear that these are options for, you're not setting derivative to 10 seconds. These are the kind of options for it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to convey that.
Google Sheets. I'll put a screenshot in the doc. But like how I'm sure Excel does something. But like Google Sheets maybe it was Numbers. Actually, I'm thinking of the Mac Numbers app. How it kind of has its like tries to have a prettier UI for like formulas in spreadsheets. Is I guess kind of similar-ish to what you're talking about, Torkel.
Yeah.
But of course, we should aim higher than Excel formulas.
I have another one, which is how does it look when we just have a lot of inline options in one row? So kind of having a design that just shows an overflow model. That would be interesting.
Yeah, look into that. So the idea is that they just should sort of wrap. But yeah, I will look into that.
Cool.
Really great work with this, Patrick. Looks nice.
Thanks.
Yep, I think so too.
I can't wait to use this. Can't wait to build this.
Yeah, just have to solve the last 3 super difficult parts now.
And it also aligns the form styles to be sort of, so we don't have these really huge layout differences between forms, which is nice.
I have another question. When will the option appear to delete a whole row? Because currently the trash can is hidden. Or is it just a Figma prototype thing?
Yeah, so I can show you if I remember. So if I add so now since you sort of have to have, as the way I understood it, I think Torkel or Gabor can sort of correct me if I'm wrong, but you sort of have to have a field because that is sort of the data. So, but when you add a field, you get the option to remove one of them.
Okay, I see. So when you have more rows.
Yeah. So this is sort of different in different situations. There could be situations where you had more rows, but you don't need to have any rows.
Okay, makes sense. Thank
you.
So
for Influx, you will need at least 1 row there. You can have more, but you can't have 0 rows. That will not run.
Patrick, I have a quick question. So I know right now this is designed for the influx data source. Have you tried kind of mirroring this data sources, or what's your? Sorry.
So I actually sort of. So I sort of focused in a bit on influx, since I think it's sort of a candidate for to try it out as the first data source, but I have sort of explored with multiple data sources. I think can sort of just share here. So I started basically quite a lot with the cloud data sources like CloudWatch and let's see here. Is this also? So with Azure as well, and you're sort of trying to figure out how they work. And also, I looked a bit at, I haven't really tried anything with graphite. Yeah, I did try some. Yeah, so with graphite, it's a bit special because depending on how you build the query, so if you build it with tags, this system with this component makes sense. But if you just do it the old way, the old segment component actually works a bit better. So it sort of depends on how you create it. So I'm trying it with different data sources. So so I'm not just focusing on InfluxDB.
Cool. This sounds really.
Cool. I think that's it. If no one has anything else.
I have it's not on the agenda, but if it's okay, if you have time left, I can show a quick thing.
Sure.
Yeah, this is actually something that I did before summer, but because of vacations and I think there was the UX session was canceled or something didn't align, so I didn't get a chance to show it off before summer. And it's let's see, I can screen. It's related to transformations. So in 8.1, we added 2 new really kind of impactful transformations. Let's see, I can share my screen. So we added 2 transformations that allow you to extract as part of your query, extract part of your query results or a separate query and use that as source for configuration. So think of you want to have the threshold line as instead of being hard coded, you want to write a separate query that can query for that threshold line. Or another example would be that you want to you have a table in your SQL database or whatever that has the sensor, that has the unit, maybe has a min and max value, and you want to use that min and max value in your gauge or in your visualization. And that's what these 2 new transformations does. There's one that called config from query, where you have a separate query that can be used to apply configuration to another query. And as an example, can look at this one where we have this config from query result, where you specify a name of the query that should be used for configuration, and I've actually named this. So the A, B, C, you can actually change those default query names to something more meaningful. And I've changed this query name to config, and I can then select it here and specify that I want to apply this to all numerical fields, and I want to sort of map. In this case, I want to map threshold, and because the data has names that's called threshold 1, all of this kind of automatic. So it's trying to kind of automatically find suitable fields and map those to display settings like min and max and threshold here. But the thing that I really want, the thing that I wanted to do as we're working on these 2 new transformations was also improve the ease of use a little bit of transformations. And I wanted also to make it possible to disable a transformation, so you could look at the data before it was transformed. I've added, so if I look at some data, let's take this and look at the raw data. And if I add a transformation called reduce here, for example, and it looks good, but I want to then kind of remove this transformation to look at the raw data, there was no way to do that. And so the solution for that was to use the exact same thing we'd use for queries, to use the I. But I wanted to make kind of before in query editors, the only way to kind of show that a query was disabled was we changed the icon. But I wanted a more active state to showcase that you have actually disabled this query. And I'm using the same thing we are using for like active tabs here. And that was the main reason for that, was that I also explored kind of making information about transformations more accessible. So when you add a new transformation, you get these helpful descriptions, what these transformations actually do. And I wanted to make, but you can't see that descriptions once you have actually added a transformation. So what is also new here is this new information or help icon that opens a markdown that can show you either the description, but if there is also a help, they can show you examples for how to actually use this transformation, examples of outputs and inputs of what this transformation does. And this is like a persisted info state that I also needed an active state for in this. And we have the same thing for debug, which is also an active kind of open state here. So this was something that was added in 8.1. So all transformations now can be disabled. They can show if you don't have not all have these kind of examples yet, but they do show the description and a link to the transformation documentation where we do have some. But for some of them, I wanted to have some more guidance in the app or a link to the docs. So that's kind of the gist of this change. The thing that I'm struggling from a UX perspective was like, having information or almost like information or documentation content that is large. And I think Lucas also ran into this problem that we don't have a good info box that works if it's a large content. So if I can link in Figma, there's a file that's called large info boxes, where I go through my challenges with like the current info boxes we had, and that they don't really work well with like large info boxes. They don't. You get this big blue box, and it's also on the secondary background, which is not ideal for large content. It's mainly designed for smaller cards. And I tested many variations for like an open help box, and didn't find anything that I really felt great about. So that's why I kind of ended up with this kind of more kind of open state that is with a help box that is not really tied to, it's not a separate box, but it's more tied to exactly the transformation you're in. So it's not an info box that we can use in other places, I think, because it's it uses the header as a way to collapse and open it. Any thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
What?
Go ahead.
I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around a little bit right now is sort of how the documentation in the app here would go along with whatever the documentation that is in the docs. You know, so like, are we going to, for example, make sure that the tech rating team reviews this or rates it, or, you know, like, I think we'd need to make sure that that's aligned very tightly so that we don't have inconsistencies, which could be very confusing. It's a little bit of a maintenance question.
Yeah, this is definitely something that should be mirrored in the documentation and be updated at the same time.
I guess maybe on that one, I wonder if that longer form style of content, I wonder if showing that and including that within Grafana is the right approach. If there's like small, brief explainers and then linking out to the documentation for this is the small, brief explainer.
Yeah, because these transformations are pretty complex. This is just showing a simple use case, and then the rest is in the documentation where there's much more detailed examples, and so this is the small version. But that just kind of tries to get the general gist across of kind of the use case.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to my mind is we should be consistent in how we are displaying the information. For some of them, we just have a blurb and then a link to the documentation. And then for others, we have examples and more content. So a user might get confused by that. They might think that there's some missing information there within the UI.
Yeah, I think obviously it would be better, be optimal if all had the same level of kind of detail here. But in the absence of that, I think having more detail on the tricky ones is also fine, and it's better than none, or some inconsistent level of information here feels like better than none.
I kind of understand Gita's point, because maybe for the user, since this is something new, the user wouldn't necessarily know if that is less complex than something else that they have clicked on. And maybe the user may wonder, okay, why did I find more information in one and not in the other one? I don't know, maybe just putting ourselves in the shoes of the user in terms of trying to understand that better. And I think it's great to have this kind of content in the platform, just to give them a little bit of more context. So I would also vouch for having the same level of information, if it's possible, for all of the transformations.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think it's more as a matter of getting that documentation.
And what happens when we update documentation? Will this markdown file that you mentioned that gets updated automatically? Are they in sync?
No, this will have to be kind of something that I think we should. We can have some references in sort of hidden references in the documentation, that there is also if you update these, you should also update this file.
Right.
Because this documentation is not it's copied
yeah, they might get stale quickly. So.
Yeah, I think in general we need. I think we need to make a decision on what the purpose of the inline documentation should be, and if what kind of level of detail we want to give there, or if we want to keep it just to examples and a rough description of what it does. I'm also in favor of Josh's suggestion on linking to a more comprehensive documentation somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that would be a good exercise for the TechBuddy team to kind of actually similar to Patrick's project, right? Kind of a guideline on how to build query editors, a guideline on how to write inline documentation.
Yeah. Another new thing in it too was this kind of beta label to mark a transformation as kind of new or and maybe have some rough edges.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's worked well with the beta, I think. And maybe
it feels like it could maybe be better as I wonder if it should be. I should have now that I see it. So it should be next to the name or next to the actions.
Yeah, I would say next to the name, but that's just me.
Yeah, looking at it now, I agree.
Yeah, I second that. Just because everything on the right is so interactive.
Yeah. Any kind of thoughts on a more clear active state for these actions before they just change the icon and not had this kind of more highlighted state?
I would embrace the striking through. Maybe use that in the title as well, so that rows to fields is struck out.
Yeah, it's just hard. So hard to read. It does change color. It becomes gray, but it's hard to read.
I don't know. I don't know what the strike through would do. I'm just thinking about it from like an accessibility point of view. That could be. I don't know if it would be problematic. We might want to look at that.
Yeah.
But I mean, just generally the treatment of like the tab treatment under the icons. Personally, I actually like that quite a bit. I think it helps a lot because of how small the icons are to distinguish that. But that's just my big fat opinion.
So the reason there is also like in screenshots when people share, it can be hard to kind of when they have a bunch of queries, but some are actually disabled and sometimes they don't actually see that they have disabled a query and they ask, oh, I am not seeing anything. So that's one other reason to sort of more highlight it more.
And just by being explicit and saying disabled in parentheses behind the title of the transformation.
Yeah, that's similar as we do here. Could work. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds good. Any other comments?
Cool. I just have one more question for Patrick, if he's still around. So I think it all looks great. So I'm curious to hear about the next steps. I mean, when will we see this in Grafana UI? And I mean, is there going to be like a query editor part of Grafana UI? Is that like the long-term goal here? I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is that we should have a section in Grafana UI, especially for query builders, and it's basically for our own needs, but also for like plugin builders. The time frame, the idea is we're going to show stuff next week on the community call and hopefully get some feedback there. And my goal is that we should actually try implementing them in a data source after 8.2, I guess, in late September. So in October, have it implemented in one data source just as the first version and see how it works. And then, but then we will also have like a finished guide for using it and so forth. So yeah, I'm going on parental leave in November, so I want all of this done before that. So that is sort of the time frame, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Patrick, I have a question as well. Are we thinking of running a couple of usability testings on that, or eventually perhaps presenting it on a community call just to hear from our users what they think on that?
So as I said, so we're presenting on the community call next week. Hopefully get good feedback there.
Sorry. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah, but I haven't really thought about user tests in a longer term, but maybe that is a really good idea.
Excellent. I guess everyone's looking forward to these curated guides. Then, since we're at the end of the session, anything we can do better next time? Nope. Going once, going twice. Cool. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye.